All right. Well, good afternoon and welcome. It's a pleasure to be here again this year. We're going to continue on with our Tinning Founders Day Osteopathy lecture. And for those of you that are new to this, which is most of the people in the room, you have entered quite a historic profession, and it all started here in Kirksville. And this is one of the things we do to celebrate what happened here in Kirksville and the benefit to society through the osteopathic profession. And we do this every year just to remember our roots and to understand where we've been and where we were going. And we have this nice lecture. And Dr. Tinning was the 8th president of ATSU-KCOM from 84 to 96. And in your brochure, you can see the picture of the late Dr. Tinning and his late wife, Janet Tinning, as they were pictured. This lecture was provided before by the Scott family. Again, they were DOs from the early 1900s, and they provided an endowment for the lecture, and the funds for that had run out. And then Dr. Tinning, when he was looking at a way to give back to the university and the profession, which he so much loved, he created this endowment to give this lecture. And so this is what we're here to do today. And then so today, we're really quite privileged to have Dr. Joseph Brooks here to present the lecture to you and to share his insights of what it was like to be in your situation and then to move through the first half of his career. So Dr. Brooks is a 2007 graduate here from KCOM, also got a Master's of Health Administration at the same time. Then he went on to do a physical medicine and rehabilitation residency at the University of Missouri, and he's a boarded and a fellow of both the American Osteopathic College of PMR as well as the American Academy of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation. He's been quite active at the national, local, and even the regional level in his state societies and his professional organization, and he is the president-elect of the American Osteopathic College of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation. Please welcome Dr. Joseph Brooks for our Tinning Founders Day Osteopathy lecture.
Okay. Thank you for that kind introduction, Dr. Snyder. It's really humbling to be back here. Quite an honor to speak to the students of KCOM, as well as our alumni and staff and other guests today. I present here today with gratitude for the education I received here at ATSU, both in medicine and in healthcare. I did do the dual degree program, and it gave me an education that was unique. I returned today hoping to inspire some of you and give you some insights into the tenets of osteopathic medicine, which are the foundations of my career, as well as discuss a little bit about the philosophy of osteopathy and the art of medicine in general. I have no conflicts of interest to disclose for the CME purposes of today's event. My learning objectives for you is to summarize the historical context and philosophical foundations of osteopathic medicine. I know you all have already learned some of this, but we want to review it today as part of Founders Day. I want to explain the 4 tenets of osteopathic medicine as I understand them, as they're currently articulated by the American Osteopathic Association, the principles of assessment and management, how they apply to the whole person. We're going to illustrate the relationship between structure and function and discuss the self-regulatory, self-healing mechanisms that can support your patient's recovery, and review the rational treatment approach to patient care that this tenets can give us. So these are our tenets. We're going to spend the next hour or so kind of diving into them in their historical context. The body is a unit. The person is a unit of body, mind, and spirit. The body is capable of self-regulation, self-healing, and health maintenance. Structure and function are reciprocally interrelated. Rational treatment is based on the first 3. You've probably heard those before. They continue to evolve as they're applied, but they're foundational to our practice of medicine. When I was preparing for today's talk, I had to think about how I got into where you're at now. I'm talking about first-year medical students, second-year medical students. I was surprised to think, speaking with my wife who supported me through this whole journey, that it's been over 2 decades since I was in that chair right there, chair number 13. And so I wanted to spend some time thinking about my own course. I had to, as I thought through the history of osteopathic medicine. I recall around the age of 16 being introduced to texts and writings of philosophers and getting really excited about that. I don't know if you ever got excited about something in your youthful exuberance like that, but I remember running in telling my parents that I was going to be a philosopher. And in their Midwestern pragmatic way, they looked at me with a smirk and said, "How are you going to make a living with that?" So it was at that same time I came across the Greek philosophical thought that the physician should start as a philosopher and the philosopher should start as a physician. That really changed kind of my focus. I learned later that this was attributed to Galen, a 2nd century famous physician in Rome, who wrote a book entirely about this. So I switched my interest from philosophy to physician at that time and haven't looked back. In reflecting for today's lecture, I thought maybe one day I could consider myself a philosopher in my 60s, but for now I'm really happy to be having the privilege to serve as an osteopathic physician. So as I was reviewing Galen's work, The Best Doctor is Also a Philosopher, Galen was motivated by his discontent with the medical culture of his day. And he wrote this whole book about it. He said people played lip service to Hippocrates' themes, that they're too lazy to get to the level of expertise that was needed to be a physician. They lacked training in logical theory, and, quote, they had bad upbringing for their times. I might kind of comment on this, that he said it's impossible to pursue financial gain at the same time as pursuing something as great of an art as medicine. Someone who is really enthusiastic about one will inevitably despise the other. And even as I was reviewing the life of A.T. Still, he was known for saying that his patient's recovery was more to me than the dollars. He was a very generous person, and I think that rings true in my own life. I think the students should reflect on how true that is, that Galen was commenting on that. So I have been practicing now for about 20 years, and I have noticed that there is sometimes conflict between passionate physicians who want to practice the art and science of medicine and relieve the suffering of patients, sometimes conflicting with the objectives, goals, and priorities of healthcare systems or the financing of healthcare systems. And I was thinking about the students today and how many of us go into quite a bit of debt for the privilege of a job. But I would say none of us have gone into debt for a job. Hopefully, we've all been pursuing a professional calling, not just a job. And so I'd like to share a little bit of a story here, since I was invited to talk, that my first job was my internship year in medicine. And thank you for wearing your white coats today. It's amazing. But that was the year I changed my short white coat for a long white coat, which isn't that far away for you. When you put on the longer white coat, they start calling you doctor for some reason. They ask you for orders, and they all want you to make the decisions. That's kind of scary, because for me at that time, the white coat was a symbol of transformation on the outside, but I maybe wasn't fully developed on the inside. Still learning to be a doctor at that time, and a little bit overwhelming at times to give orders and make decisions. That year, I had the privilege early on to serve on a team of doctors taking care of a particularly elderly osteopathic physician. I was pretty nervous because I had to make decisions, medical plans for an actually well-respected DO, and didn't think I really knew what I was doing at that time, and not as well as he did. But he was very kind, and he befriended me, and he was the first person to demonstrate to me that the patient-physician relationship is really based on trust and mutual respect. And without these, you really can't have a therapeutic relationship. He encouraged me to be confident in my training. I encourage you to be confident in your training. He encouraged me to be confident in my treatment plan for his care. But after a while, he sat me down and he told me that he kind of felt sorry for me entering into my profession. And I was really surprised by that. It took me kind of by surprise. He was just one of those old doctors that seemed to just embody the very ideals of biomedical ethics. He loved medicine. He would talk about it all the time. He seemed to embody the tenets of osteopathic medicine that we're here to talk about today. But he told me he thought that he had entered into a profession, and he was worried that I was entering into a trade. I didn't understand what that meant when I was an intern. So I asked him to explain to me what he meant, and he said, very simply, a profession is a group of people set apart from society, greatly respected for its expertise, for what it does to serve that society. The members of a profession are set apart because it takes a lot of training and expertise in order to be able to do your work. And usually, that comes with a special privilege of being self-governed, because we're the only ones that really know the standard of care. Whereas a trade is a group of people with a common skill set. They are workers at a job. They're usually regulated by outside agencies. Their governing bodies and authority figures are usually made up of not the same people doing the actual work. So it's a distinction that old doctor, he really laid in my mind early on in my career, and challenged me to actually try to be a professional. As you enter into this profession of osteopathic medicine, I want to encourage you to see yourself as a professional. Do more than play lip service to these ideals that have been written before you, the biomedical ethics laid out in the osteopathic oath, the tenets articulated that we're going to talk about today. Yet, like that wise old doctor I met a long time ago, maybe like 20 years ago, I believe you're maybe setting up for a road filled with the potential for conflict, discontent and conflict with the authority figures of your day. You may be labeled a tradesperson. You may be labeled a prescriber, a provider, or an employee. But these labels that other people might give you, they're usually with a lesser reverence than those that are given to you by your own colleagues, the people who have made the sacrifices and done the hard work to become the professional you're becoming. So remember that as you enter into your profession, that this is an art. The old doctor I cared for wasn't A.T. Still. I'm not that old. But Dr. A.T. Still was called affectionately the old doctor whenever he was in his 60s and started his medical school. As I reviewed biographical sketches in preparation for today, I was reminded that there were many parallels between A.T. Still and Hippocrates, and I really wanted to spend some time discussing it today. A.T. Still, in his life and his writings and his autobiography, they all suggest that he considered himself a philosopher of his day, like Galen, discontent with the medical culture. And I found many parallels. In fact, Hippocrates was also called a wise physician. He was born to a family of priest doctors who taught him, his father taught him, his father's father taught him. At that time, in Hippocrates' time, they didn't have the necessity for formal training like you're getting here, but they would self-proclaim being a physician after enough unstructured training, usually within their family. Hippocrates was exceptional in breaking with that tradition and starting his own school for people who wanted to practice the art. He held them to a high standard and wrote out the Hippocratic Oath for that reason. In a very similar way, A.T. Still was the son of a Methodist preacher who was also a practicing rural physician, and A.T. Still learned most of his early career medicine from his father. At that time, a lot of rural physicians would learn in an apprenticeship type of way until that person training them felt they had taught them everything they needed to know. A.T. Still kind of deviated from that when he started the American School of Osteopathy and have been holding their graduates to very high standards, including taking the osteopathic oath. Hippocrates was way before us. In the 5th century BCE, he was the father of Western medicine, so to speak. But he wanted to shift away from supernatural explanations for disease. He emphasized clinical observation, logical reasoning, and the healing power of nature. He viewed the patient as a psychosomatic entity with mind, body, and environment being integrated, very similar to Andrew Taylor Still. In fact, Dr. Still revived the Hippocratic philosophy, and some have said that the heritage of osteopathic medicine is the humanization of the physician's relationship to the patient. I'm not going to read the entire osteopathic oath to you, but I do think I took it when I did a white coat ceremony. Maybe you did. Everyone here has a white coat in front of me. I think I took it again when I graduated, and I do remember more recently taking it again when I go to the AOA House of Delegates. And it made me think as an adult, as a 30-something-year-old, when I was going to the AOA House of Delegates, why were we repeating this oath? Why is this so important? Well, I've spent some time reflecting on this. Oh, shoot. Sorry. And I think you should too. When I think about my colleagues who I respect, who are practicing physicians, and they're trying to apply the art and science of medicine, most of them have taken an oath similar to this. Whereas other people I work with, other providers and administrators in healthcare, I've asked them, and they tell me they've taken no oath. It's just a subtle difference, but you'll notice there's a difference in the professionalism of people who play more than just lip service to this oath. And I encourage you to read through it and really put it on your heart, what it means. For me, it's been a moral compass, something that teaches us true north. And just like the tenets of osteopathic medicine, I believe there are foundational roots upon which, for me, each layer of continuing education and each volume of additional knowledge has just been applied on top of these oaths and these tenets that we've learned in school. In fact, one of the great advantages, I think, to osteopathic medicine is, from my perspective, being encouraged to gain more than just competence and book knowledge, but also mentored by the people who come before us to have the wisdom to apply it. It all started with A.T. Still proclaiming osteopathy was a new and distinct form of medicine in 1874. He wrote this out in what he called our platform. This is a copy of it, describing some of the original position statements he made to differentiate his students from regulars or the medical doctors of the time. So the original platform had 9 position statements. I'm not going to read through them all, but it's interesting how this has evolved over time. If we fast forward to 1897, a publication in the Journal of Osteopathy, this is a very interesting article in the scope and spirit of osteopathy. This discussed 8 principles at the time of osteopathy as it was evolving. My takeaway from this was they described it as a science. They called it the science of osteopathy. They wanted it to be understood on empirical fact, something measurable. I think they're from the show me state. They wanted to base it on what they could see and touch and feel and measure in anatomy and physiology, kind of grounded in science. They wanted to avoid pharmacy and drugs. I think that was the second big takeaway at that time. They were really against the drugs of the doctor of medicine at the time. Which is probably makes sense if you go back and study that time period of the 1890s. The drugs were literally snake oil and being sold over the counter with large claims that were not scientific. Medical practices of that era were, by comparison to today, rudimentary, including bloodletting, purges, and laxatives. Many doctors prescribed medicines that were really just dangerous chemicals like mercury and opium to cause the body to really purge whatever illness was inside of there. That's how it was described as I reviewed the time period that A.T. Still was practicing as an MD. Also, these patent medications that popped up were being sold today, maybe you'd call it over-the-counter, but this predates over-the-counter, so this is the precursor to that, called patent medicines. They failed to deliver on their promises. They did give temporary relief because they included lots of things like alcohol, morphine, opium, and cocaine. These types of medications were not regulated until 1906 when Congress made the Pure Food and Drugs Act banning these ingredients from over-the-counter medications. So as we review that medical context, to understand that A.T. Still was practicing during these times, I think it's easy for us to think, oh, I'd be like A.T. Still. I wouldn't do that stuff. I wouldn't bloodlet. I would be discontent with the non-scientific approach that seems to be the standard of the care. But I don't think we can judge them out of context to their history, because that is exactly what they were learning, was their standard of care. They were trying to do the best practice of their time. But what did make A.T. Still remarkable was that he had the moral courage to break from those traditions and to look for something different, something better. He was a pioneer looking for something better than these types of drugs. So I had to kind of go back and read his actual writings to try to get inside his head of what he was thinking when he started all of this. In 1899, he wrote Principles to an Osteopath, means a perfect plan and specification to build and form a house, an engine, a man, a world, or anything for object purpose. Later in 1902, he published Principles of Osteopathy, give us understanding of the perfect plans and specifications following man's construction. To comprehend this engine of life, it is necessary to constantly keep in the plan and specifications before the mind and in the mind to such a degree that there is no lack of knowledge of all the location and uses of any and all parts. I thought Dr. Snyder said that, actually. When I was a student here, I felt like we had a lot of anatomy. I mean, we were always studying either functional anatomy or actual cadaver anatomy. And I think that probably stems from A.T. Still's love of anatomy and his emphasis on understanding this. Reading his early works as a medical student, I was reminded of my own childhood. My grandfather was a mechanic by trade, and my dad restored old cars as a hobby. I was very familiar growing up with engines and belts and construction and things like that. But my first education in the principle of osteopathic medicine was probably in middle school in shop class. I had an assignment to take an engine just like this one. I had to take an engine apart, clean all the parts, and then reassemble it. The only way to get an A, any A students in the crowd? Yeah. The only way to get an A was to make sure that engine would start and run. I did get the A. I did get the engine to start and run. But I've been wondering why. I think that when I was taking apart the engine, I cared about each part. I was kind of paying attention to how they were like put together, how they were related to each other. I didn't want any leftover parts. When I started, that was my worry. Other kids were kind of in a hurry to get done with the project and move on with their day. So they took it apart as fast as possible. And when they put it back together, I would notice that the engines that didn't start had a lot of leftover parts laying over there. So that's when I learned that the parts are important. They need to be in the right place in order to work together for the whole system to work, for the engine to function, to be optimized. Everything needs to work together in harmony, the way it was created to work for its purpose. A.T. Still discussed this in his platform of osteopathy. He said, quote, "Man cannot add anything to this perfect work nor improve the functioning of the normal body. The disease is an effect only and a positive proof that a belt is off, a journal bent, or cog broken. The man's power to cure is only as good as far as he has knowledge of right and normal position, so far as he has skill to adjust the bones, muscles, and ligaments, and give freedom to nerves, blood, and secretions, and no further. We credit God with wisdom and skill to perform perfect work on the house and life in which man lives." The medical culture of the 1890s, when he started our school, was different than it is today. But in many ways, it's still the same. A.T. Still called MDs the regulars. He had described that type of medicine has been described as heroic, meaning that it emphasized the important role of drastic measures like bloodletting and cocaine prescribing. But I also think that the philosophy of the day was also made the physician the most important part of that equation, that they had to cure and only they could fix you. When I read A.T. Still's early works, and his autobiography, that's not what I take away. I take away a legacy of thought, placing the physician in a more humble relationship to the patient, emphasizing the self-healing nature of the body itself. Dr. Still is famous for saying to find health should be the object of the physician. Anyone can find disease. I know probably for 15, 20 years, people have been coming in and already have it all figured out from Dr. Google and now ChatGPT. So this will probably always be true. Anyone can find disease and they all know what's wrong, but they're not really sure how to get better. In 1918, this Declaration of Principles, a precursor to our current tenets of osteopathic medicine, laid out just how they thought we could find health. Number one, the human body is a self-reparative and self-recuperative vital organism. Number two, osteopathic physicians give prime attention to the consideration, to the diagnosis and mechanical adjustments by manipulation of vertebral abnormalities, maladjustments, on account of the direct anatomical and physiological relationship of the spinal nerves to the vasculature, chemical, and organic control of the vital mechanism. Even though it's kind of worded in 1918 language, it's very similar to what I learned in 2007 here at Kirksville. One of the takeaways from this article that I read was that what distinguished osteopathic endeavor was understanding the relationship of part to part and part to whole. Later in 1953, our science of osteopathy had greatly expanded. Schools had greatly expanded, and there needed to be a consensus. There needed to be kind of a description of our tenets. Who were we? What was our identity? The science of osteopathy changes over time. You're part of that growth. A special committee of osteopathic principles and osteopathic technique from our very own Kirksville College of Osteopathy and Surgery recommended this as an interpretation of the osteopathic concept. And they published this in the Journal of Osteopathy in October of 1953. This later became adopted by the AOA that year as our official tenets. And I had to kind of go figure out when that was adopted, but that was adopted in 1953 at the AOA. And since I still go to the House of Delegates, I wondered when was the last time we actually reaffirmed this. And it was in 2023. So for relatively 70 years, this has been relatively unchanged as our tenets of osteopathy. So these are our tenets. I read them earlier. They're simple and self-evident, yet kind of profound. I believe every osteopathic physician, every student here today, no matter what specialty you might choose to go into, these all apply to your approach to the patient. I'm going to spend the next few minutes kind of describing how they apply in my practice, just to give some examples of how I see that they work when I go see my patients. The first one is the body is a unit. The person is a unit of body, mind, and spirit. Like my engine example from middle school, the body needs all of its parts, and they need to work in unity to be something more than the sum of the parts. Likewise, our first tenet reminds me to see the person first, a disease second. It's a holistic view of a person. It cannot be limited to just understanding disease, pathology, or even just the physical body. I think you have to look a little deeper at what it really means to be human if you really want to be a physician. Theodore Roosevelt said, "No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care." When you start communicating with real patients, I think you need to keep that in mind. This first tenet reminds me of that. I believe this tenet was a historical precursor to what many now talk about the biopsychosocial model of health, which is great. However, in that model, little is mentioned about the spiritual nature of a human. More emphasis on mental, social, and emotional determinants of health. So just something to think about in the historical context. Dr. Still was a change agent. He revolutionized the way physicians approach the patient with tenets like this one. Many people tell me that DOs are losing the distinctiveness. I kind of disagree, but to the extent that that might be true, I wonder if this may be because we declared our tenets so easy to understand 70 years ago, and maybe they have changed the way allopathic medicine has approached the patient care a little bit as well. So we've come together. I wonder if also the constraints of our healthcare system at times try to reduce the patient-physician relationship to a relative value unit. I would encourage you to try not to think that way, but to fully appreciate the whole person when you're practicing medicine. To me, this tenet speaks to the dynamic interplay of a triune nature of a person, a whole person requiring optimal physical health, mental health, and spiritual health to achieve optimal wellness. I'm going to give just one example of this in my own career, but it was during the COVID pandemic. It was quite striking. I was practicing inpatient rehabilitation, and my hospitalized patients were coming from anywhere from an ICU to medical floors with all sorts of impairments and diseases. But we went through an unfortunate natural experiment where all of my patients went under quarantine, were separated completely from their loved ones. They weren't allowed any physical touch or interaction with their spouses, their kids, their friends, their pets. They were very isolated for about 6 weeks. During that time, the loss of spirit in my patients was palpable. Their will to engage in therapy, dramatically worse. Their intrinsic drive for self-healing impacted tremendously. It didn't matter why they were there, their specific disease. All of them had a diminished outcome because their spirit was so affected by their isolation. And then, right after we lessened our quarantine and allowed people to interact with their loved ones and see their pets and get a hug, it dramatically changed. That was my experience. I don't know how to study that, but that was my experience during the pandemic. The second tenet of osteopathic medicine is the body is capable of self-regulation, self-healing, and health maintenance. I love Voltaire's take on this concept. He said the art of medicine consists of amusing the patient while nature cures the disease. He clearly understood that laughter is the best medicine. Also, he clearly understood that to some degree the body is capable of self-healing. From this quote, I have often felt osteopathic physicians should have a strong knowledge of the natural history of diseases. You should understand as time goes by what happens when people have different diseases, if left to its own device. But you also need to understand the risks and benefits of the treatments that you're offering. If Voltaire or Galen or A.T. Still, if they did do this, if all they did was amuse people, I think they did more than that, but if that's what they did, they may have avoided the harmful side effects of bloodletting, mercury, and poorly validated or harmful treatments of their times. This approach would have been aligned with the dictum, first do no harm. Even today, I believe physicians often attribute our interventions as the reason illness resolves, when all they may have needed was a tincture of time. It's a form of recall bias. It's hard to tell. Perhaps at times we take too much credit for the self-healing that is going on, making the doctor the most important part of the patient-physician relationship. I think as osteopathic physicians, we need to value that the body is capable of this type of self-healing. I do utilize osteopathic manipulation treatment in my practice, and I recognize that the self-healing and health maintenance of the body can increase in capacity for healing through our deliberate adjustments of the body, through our interventions. Sometimes the way I think about this, as an example, is that I can suture together an incision, but I can't make the skin heal together. The body has to do that work. Most of you probably have background in biology of some sort, or maybe already have covered and should understand the concept of homeostasis. I always think of homeostasis when I think of this tenet. It's the biological term that describes a steady state of internal physical and chemical conditions to maintain a living system. It is the optimal functioning of the organism. You have to maintain steady states of things like body temperature, fluid balance, etc. Osteopathic tenets date back to 1874, this concept of an important self-regulating mechanism. But the concept of internal environment being a steady state of physiological norm was first discussed by French physiologist Claude Bernard in 1849. The word homeostasis, actually, probably everyone in this room understands homeostasis. I bet you've all been educated on it. But that actually wasn't even coined until Walter Cannon said it in 1926. So a lot of the concepts that we've been taught by the tenets of osteopathy really predate some of these concepts that are in our science textbooks. But AT still figured it out somehow. I don't know. The utilization of osteopathic manipulation treatments are often aimed at promoting exactly this self-healing mechanism, removing somatic dysfunctions that keep the body unit from achieving optimal health. In my practice, I practice orthobiologics. This is using different types of tissues like stem cells and platelet-rich plasma to promote healing in the body. Platelet-rich plasma is rich in a variety of growth factors, such as platelet-derived growth factor, vascular endothelial growth factor, to name a few. I've kind of listed a few of them on there. These bioactive molecules stimulate essential functions such as cellular proliferation, angiogenesis, and extracellular matrix synthesis, crucial for all tissue repair and regeneration. Treatment with orthobiologics would be irrational if I did not believe that the body is capable of self-repair. But sometimes I think the science of our day, we are given many tools to help that go a little bit further whenever the healing is inhibited. The third tenet of osteopathic medicine is structure and function are reciprocally interrelated. To me, this one has always seemed fractal in nature. This was first derived by A.T. Still and his love of anatomy and physiology and the study of the musculoskeletal system. But I have found this to be true in all sorts of areas of my education. I believe it pops up in examples at the cellular level, molecular level, organ level, body level, and whole person level. I'm going to give a few examples today. In my practice, I do electrodiagnostic medicine. I do EMG tests to diagnose nerve diseases. You have to understand nerve anatomy and physiology to do that. One example of this tenet that just makes sense to me is understanding how the nerve functions at the cellular level. For example, this is a picture of sodium channels which are organized into clusters on nerve axons in between the myelin sheath at the nodes of Ranvier. We know that this is helpful in propagating efficient action potentials. In fact, if you lose the myelin sheath, you'll experience a functional deficit of what's called conduction block. The action potentials just won't go. And I've always, before I understood the structural anatomy of the nerve, I didn't understand what conduction block was. But the signals can't get through because, as you can see, the sodium channels are more concentrated at the nodes of Ranvier. It's kind of beautiful when you scan into that level of the body's structure and function and realize it wouldn't work if it wasn't organized the way it's organized at this level. We can zoom out a little bit and look at more of an organ level of the motor unit. There are principles such as the Heinemann's size principle, describing the relationship of our motor neurons to our muscle fibers. Motor neurons with large cell bodies tend to innervate fast twitch muscles. Motor neurons with small cell bodies tend to innervate slow twitch muscles. In order to have a particular amount of contraction, it takes a small amount of electricity to depolarize a smaller motor unit, and recruitment requires more and more of these neurons to fire to get more muscles to fire. What's interesting to me is that in pathology, if you have denervation, say that green one there, gets broken, those muscle fibers will be denervated, and somehow the body is smart enough to tell the red axon there in that diagram to collaterally sprout and connect to these muscle fibers. Collateral sprouting and reinnervation of a neighboring denervated muscle fiber must have a paracrine communication between nerve and muscle. I don't think we fully understand how that happens. But what's even more fascinating is if those purple muscle fibers there in the diagram were fast twitch muscle fibers, and the denervated muscle next to it was slow twitch. But it gets reinnervated by a fast twitch neuron. The neuron input has a direct impact on the DNA and the phenotype of the muscle fiber and will completely change the type of contractile properties of our muscle. So we can compartmentalize as much as we want in the science that we learn this is a neuron, this is a muscle. But they are interrelated even at this level. And it's a beautiful example of how structure and function are interrelated at an organ level. If we zoom out one more time and think about the entire body and its human function, I think this is where AT still really came to shine, and our osteopathic skills and education and osteopathic manipulation treatments are really highlighted. The glossary of osteopathic terminology defines somatic dysfunction as impaired or altered function of related components of somatic body framework, skeletal, arthrodial, myofascial, and related vascular, lymphatic, and neural elements. Obviously, this echoes the historical documents I was quoting earlier. But somatic dysfunction wouldn't even make sense if structure and function weren't interrelated. This is a core principle for us as osteopathic physicians. I'm going to zoom out one more time. But I feel like as the president-elect of the American Osteopathic College of PM&R, I had to mention physiatry today as an ambassador to my specialty. The AOA formally recognized our specialty in 1953 to 1954. I was just thinking, putting this together, that must have been a busy year. The AOA adopted the osteopathic oath, the tenets of osteopathic medicine, and they made physical medicine rehab a specialty, all in the same year. Physiatrists like myself are focused on human function or human performance and quality of life, focused on musculoskeletal medicine, much like all DOs. I think this osteopathic tenet of structure and function being reciprocally interrelated really aligns well with physiatry. I think that physiatrists are well served to start at osteopathic medical schools because of our tenets and our approach, person-first approach. Oftentimes our osteopathic manipulation treatment skills aid somatic dysfunction treatments and align well with osteopathic physiatry. Somatic dysfunction is defined as the relationship of a body part to a body part, or a body part to the whole body. Physiatry also taught me something else. It taught me to consider the relationship of a person to the activities that they want to do and to the other people and roles that they want to fill. We diagnose and treat structure and function relationship of the whole person as it relates to activities, abilities, and relationships to roles. The World Health Organization and the International Classifications of Impairments, Disabilities, and Handicap defines impairment as a loss or abnormality of psychological, physiological, or anatomical structure or function. That definition really kind of rhymes with somatic dysfunction for me. Disability is any restriction or lack of ability resulting from an impairment to perform an activity in a manner which is consistent with normal human behavior. And a handicap is a disadvantage for a given individual that limits or prevents the fulfillment of a role that's considered normal in your society. I would like to just kind of say that putting this lecture together, I gained a greater appreciation of structure and function and how it has a fractal nature, that its interrelatedness at the cellular level, body level, and whole person levels. But I also started to see how structure and function of the art and the science of medicine are reciprocally interrelated. The philosophy and practice of medicine are reciprocally interrelated, and you cannot optimize one without the other. Which brings us to our final tenet. Rational treatment is based upon the understanding of those other tenets. I'll say that when I was in your seat, I did not understand why we needed a fourth tenet, because the first three tenets told me what I was supposed to do, and the third tenet just said, do the first three tenets. But in reviewing the historical context, I think I have a better understanding of AT still, what he was thinking at the time. A lot of the treatments were irrational and not scientific, maybe even harmful. As we've shown, A.T. Still was a rational thinker, a philosopher. Much like Hippocrates and Galen, he proposed a new school of thought. He spent an entire adult lifetime refining the philosophy of osteopathy. The legacy we have today comes from the foundation of philosophical thought that he put into practice through a life's work, but not just Dr. Still, but I believe over 150 years of all osteopathic physicians collectively, practicing and contributing to the art of medicine and the health of our patients. I'd like to conclude today with one hopefully inspiring thought. The Latin word for work has two modern meanings, labor and opus. Labor being that tedious, meaningless toil. Think electronic medical record. And opus, meaning a meaningful contribution of a career of passionate effects culminating in a masterpiece. Osteopathic medicine has a philosophy that we've discussed today. It has tenets, it has an oath to guide us as physicians to aspire to create an opus out of our work. Today, the art of medicine, I believe, is alive and well in practicing physicians as well as the students like you here today. You're going to carry forward the legacy of A.T. Still, who created a magnum opus. He started with his life and the work of A.T. Still. When you get out into practice, you may find yourself also discontent with the medical status of your day, some of the status quo and some of the standard of care. I would encourage you to consider A.T. Still as an example to you, to continue a legacy of change, to be a change agent, to be the change you want to see. It's only rational. Thank you for having me today.
Dr. Brooks, thank you so much for just a wonderful presentation, so inspirational. I hope each of our students here today takes that forward as they enter this profession, of the rich history that we have, and as a reminder of what makes us who we are as osteopathic physicians. And you're a great example of that. Thank you so much for coming back and sharing your time and your thoughts here. And I'd like to present to you the Fred C. Tinning PhD Founders Day Osteopathic Lecture plaque, and it's presented to Dr. Joseph Brooks for your contributions to us today. And thank you again so much. We're so proud to have you as our graduate. Thank you.
Okay.
They want a photo of you with us.
Well, Mike?
It'll give us something to put on our fridge.
He likes us in front here a little bit.
Thanks.
Thanks again, Joe. Great job.
Thank you.
So much. Appreciate it.
Okay, well, thank you for your attention. At this time, I invite the students to join us in the Blumenthal lab for the Find and Fix. We'll have a brief 5-minute presentation by one of your faculty members, followed by just kind of a free-for-all where the participants there who are physicians in practice will demonstrate how they treat things, and so you're invited to just kind of cluster around them in groups and say, hey, you know, my shoulder's been bothering me. How would you treat this? So anyhow, so you're all invited over to the Blumenthal lab. Thank you very much.
We forget, and we just need to be reminded.
Yeah.